Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank particularly the organisers of this excellent forum. It's clearly very badly needed. My background, first of all, I'm representing an organisation called FAIR, which stands for the Federal Accountability Initiative for Reform. And the name doesn't make it obvious, but our role in life is to help protect whistleblowers. You've heard already from the Canadians for Accountability. Our focus is more on the law and the implementation of laws to protect whistleblowers. There are very limited resources in this area, and so none of us have the ability to help all the people out there that need help, and that's our focus. My background, I had a successful career in industry. I'm an engineer by training. I'm an expert in management systems, quality management systems in particular. And in the last few years, I've essentially retired in order to devote my energy to this issue of whistleblower protection. And I'll not go into the reasons of how that came about. But this is a key part of the puzzle that we're looking at in how we make our airways safe. And as part of my preparation for this, I got out the Dryden report, which is 4 volumes like this, for those of you who haven't seen it. And in going through that, I really had a sense of déjà vu, that we're looking at very much the same situation, very same issues again. And when I turn on the TV and I see the listeriosis inquiry going on, again, the same problems, the same attitudes, the same failure to oversee the industry. I'd like to focus my remarks on the role that whistleblowers play and the challenge of protecting them adequately. Now, I don't think that I need to convince anyone in this room of the need for people to be able to speak up, either as part of the SMS system or when that's failed to go beyond that. But I would like to give you some more information that will help you perhaps to articulate the scope of the problem to others. It's very telling that if we look at other countries that we would compare ourselves with typically, the USA and Canada, that both of those countries have had whistleblower legislation for more than 20 years. We theoretically made a start recently, but as I'll explain to you, it's a false start. We really haven't gotten nowhere. It's also interesting that in both of those countries, the triggering event that caused a demand for this type of legislation was to do with transportation and aerospace. One was the Columbia shuttle disaster, in which the O-rings failed. The other was, and which led to the loss of the entire crew, including a civilian teacher. The other was the sinking of a roll-on, roll-off ferry off Zeebrugge in Europe, in which over 190 lives were lost because the ferry sailed set to sea with the bow doors open, and it sank within minutes. Now, the investigations of those disasters in both cases found that employees within the industry were fully aware of the problems that led to the tragedy, and in fact had tried every means at their disposal to have those problems addressed, and that they had been ignored, and hence the preventable disasters were allowed to occur. There's also compelling statistical evidence that whistleblowing is one of the most powerful ways of keeping an industry honest. And I'll point to studies that have been done of white-collar crime, international studies, that show that typically 40% or more of frauds that are uncovered through employee tip-offs by various means, hotlines and so on. And that's in contrast to, that's far ahead of the detection rate from audit and from other management controls combined. The next most important method of discovery is by accident. So that's, to me, those are compelling arguments that say that we absolutely need to tap into this resource. And it only makes common sense that in this industry there are so many thousands of people employed within the carriers, within the regulator, within NAVCAN, and so on. And these people know what is going on. They know when the shortcuts are being taken. They know when the rules are being broken. If only we could allow them to speak up safely, and then we would know what was going on. So I'm going to make the argument that that we have to have a strategy of stripping away the excessive and unnecessary secrecy that is being layered over this entire system. And there are many parts to that, but the part I'd like to focus on is the whistleblowers. Now the challenge here, some of you might think this is not going to be too difficult, we'll just add a few lines in the regulation and it's done. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. And I'd like to give you a sense of that by talking about the typical experience of a whistleblower, because we have some of them here, and I think all of them will attest to the extreme stress and damage to their lives that has been done to them. But these people here are survivors. These are the ones that are standing and have survived the experience and are able to talk about it. The typical experience of someone who comes across information that their bosses don't want to hear and tries to get it dealt with is that they're subject to vicious and calculated harassment and reprisals in their workplace. Attempts to isolate them, to make their colleagues frightened to speak to them, to humiliate them. And this goes on until they can't take it anymore. And at some point their doctor will say to them, you can't go to work anymore because it's going to kill you. And at that point the organization has succeeded in getting rid of them and getting them out of their workplace, in silencing them. But it goes further than that, because the employers will make every attempt to prevent them from being employable and not just lose their jobs but lose their careers. The consequences for this on them and their family are enormous. There's sometimes litigation. Regardless, they typically lose their livelihood. That leads to loss of the home. And it's very hard for family to understand what's going on here. It's very hard for them to understand when all the authorities are saying this guy's wrong, this person is, raising false alarms. It's very hard for them to understand that this is a person who's doing the right thing and standing for the truth, and hard for them to understand why this issue is apparently being put ahead of their interests. So people lose their families as well. And they end up with a lot of the type of post-traumatic stress symptoms that you'd expect from people who've been in the war. Nightmares, flashbacks, chronic depression, suicidal thoughts, and regrettably some do actually commit suicide. Now, I'm not telling you all this just to raise sympathy. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the forces that are ranged against the whistleblower, and that are there, the forces that are also standing there when you try and introduce legislation. And just I don't want to paint all these as bad people. What I've learned is that in the situation where an employee has information that might undermine confidence in the industry, then the senior people manage to rationalize that they're doing the right thing and that the whistleblower is entirely wrong. They rationalize their actions, they demonize the whistleblower, and that means that in their minds everything that they could do to this person is justified because the whistleblower is entirely wrong and doing the wrong thing. Now, you might think that you might expect the sort of behavior from a commercial firm whose profits are threatened. You might not expect, especially as Canadians, we tend to trust our government, you might not expect this kind of treatment from the government. And you'd be absolutely wrong. I'll mention a couple of cases which have relevance here. One is the case of the lady who founded the organization I'm now running, who blew the whistle on wasting extravagance in foreign affairs, was harassed out of her job. She sued her bosses for harassment, and that case is now in its 11th year. The government lawyers have asked her an enormous number of questions. I'm sorry, I'm having a blackout here. I can't remember the number, but sorry? 10,000. Right, over 10,500 questions. Government lawyers paid by us have spent their time dreaming up these questions, apparently in order to delay the case. They've also submitted her to over 30 days of cross-examination in the discovery process. The norm these days is 1 day, except in exceptional circumstances. It's very hard to look at this case and come to any other conclusion that the government lawyers, with encouragement of their client, are doing everything possible in their power to break this person financially, emotionally, and in every other way.